That's when you can leave the meeting, Chuck, if you don't want to be recorded.
I know this is all news to me.
No, it's not. Okay, everyone can go ahead and mute themselves, or I can mute you. And welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And hello to everyone who will be watching this online later. This was a really active year with advocacy at the state, and the network supported a great deal by signing on to letters and being partners in that advocacy. So we just wanted to take a moment to review the results of all of that work and for Chuck to share about how it all went and how it affected the state budget for the next few years and funding opportunities that will be available. So Chuck, I will pass it off to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for those of you who could reschedule to join today. Sorry about accelerating it by so many days, but probably was the pertinent thing to do given that this is my last day at California Relief after being affiliated with the organization for 27 years. So, you know, that old expression, go out with a bang, not a whimper. So I think we're going to talk about going out with a bang today. It was a very good year at the state legislature for natural resources and climate resilience, and a lot of the things that the organizations that are on the call now and that we'll be watching later participate in. So I think over the next few minutes, Sarah and I have prepared just a few slides, not too much, to try to provide an overview on what happened this year, some context as to why it happened, and what can be expected in the next couple of years to come. So I think I'm going to start with an overview, try to a little bit of thought into this unusual multi-year spending plan, which is definitely new, and then look at some existing programs and new opportunities as well. And then there will be times for questions at the end. I doubt we'll need the whole hour, but we do have till 1 o'clock. So I think with that, I'm going to just advance the slide here. So everyone, I think, is probably aware that shortly into 2021, there was a realization that the state budget in California had a growing surplus that was a bit unexpected, especially given what had happened in 2020. That surplus continued to grow dramatically, and as it started creeping into the $80 billion, $90 billion range, it really reshaped some thinking at the legislature for a variety of things. Probably most pertinent to the groups here is the idea of a climate resilience bond or a resources bond. And bonds have typically been the way that California supports natural resources. It's been one of the ways that urban forestry has been supported in the past. And with this huge surplus, there was the decision made, I'd say probably by late April, early May, that bonds were not going to be the way to go this year. Those are going to be set aside. And so much of what is typically covered in bonds was going to instead be covered in a fairly robust budget. And while in May, some of that was discussed, the reality is that none of it really came to fruition until the last couple of weeks of August, right before the legislature got out of session. So this is all still very new material. And as a consequence, some of the information is still coming out in terms of what some of these dollars means and what they're going to go for. So we're going to provide as much information as we can at this time, with recognition that there's still going to be additional information that moves forward in the weeks to come. What I wanted to do here is provide you with an overview of what organizations can reasonably expect in some categories that are certainly directly pertinent to urban forestry and urban greening, but may also have a secondary and tertiary component as well. The reason I want to include this chart is that this is really what exists on paper with regard to this unusual multi-year spending plan that the legislature came up with. And state statute actually doesn't allow for multi-year budgets. You have to do a budget 1 year at a time because you don't want to, the state doesn't allow you to, for lack of a better word, hamstring future legislatures. What you can do, though, is create baselines and commitments to future funding. And that's what this chart reflects. It reflects a compromise between the state Senate, state assembly, and the governor's office to support myriad conservation and resiliency programs in this fiscal year and the next 2 fiscal years. And you'll see from the chart that I've tried to capture where funding goes out for 3 years. Sometimes it's just 1 year, sometimes it's 2 years. You also see that in yellow, I tried to highlight the programs that I thought would be most pertinent to the community that's going to be watching this webinar or participating in the call today. And I'll go over a couple of these in greater detail as we go forward with some of the other slides. But I wanted to just take a moment to pause and give everyone an opportunity to kind of absorb this budget. You'll see that this is over $3 billion investment in resiliency and resources. I've been doing this, the lobbying thing in Sacramento for a little more than 20 years. I've never seen a budget like this that wasn't relying on bond funding. I have seen better or good budgets in the past, but nothing compares to this. This really was an incredible year for a variety of programs. And keep in mind that this isn't everything that was funded. I tried to pull out highlights that were pertinent to the groups watching this, but there's billions of dollars, additional dollars for agriculture, for drought, for wildfire. So the legislature and the administration really tried to do what they could to cover as many bases as possible. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is some of the record levels of funding, such as for a Transformative Climate Communities program. You know, these are large-scale, multifaceted programs that are administered through the Strategic Growth Council. There's only 6 projects, sorry, 6 projects to date, but every project has a California Relief Urban Forestry Network member attached to it. Every project has a significant green infrastructure element. So I wanted to highlight this because as additional projects go forward with this record level of funding, $420 million over 3 years, opportunities will exist for other urban forestry groups to get involved and ensure there's an urban green infrastructure element in these programs. A couple of the new programs here that I also want to touch on that we're not going to spend more time on later, so discuss now, is the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program. This was established in statute over 3 years ago. This is the first year it's getting funding. And the idea is to provide that kind of deep dive technical assistance to underserved communities to be able to apply for more funding, have a better sense of what's available at the state level, and bring some of those dollars into their communities. So this is the first time the program is being funded, allocation of $10 million this year and next year. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on that won't be in later slides are the local conservancies. There are some regions throughout California where urban forestry groups do rely on partnerships with local conservancies. Certainly the State Coastal Conservancy comes to mind, along with a couple in the Los Angeles area. So I wanted to highlight that, along with a new program that'll be coming out, Urban Streams and Rivers, again, fairly regional, Southern California, but something that may be pertinent to folks. On the conservancies, what I wanted to note, and this is under the wildfire package, is that there were some allocations this year for San Diego River, State Coastal, Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. While they appear under the wildfire package, if folks are interested in pursuing those dollars, they should reach out directly to the conservancies. There is no control language in the budget restricting those to wildfire activities. The reason I use that as an example is that the urban forestry allocation for this year also appeared under the wildfire package. And obviously the urban forestry funds are not going to be used to combat wildfire. So it's just a good opportunity to take a deeper dive into these programs and see if they would be pertinent to you. And those are funds that are available right now for this fiscal year. Let's go on to the next slide. So Sarah, who I need to thank for helping me put together the slideshow in a very short time frame, already posed or passed on to me a couple of questions. And one was about the existing California Relief Tree Covery Grant Program. This was an application that Sarah and I wrote last year and was funded through CAL FIRE's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund allocation from the previous fiscal year. And the application or the program is going to be broken up into 2 cycles. So one cycle, California Relief just awarded about a month and a half ago. The second cycle is expected to go out in January. We expect up to $600,000 to be available for that. And of course, the connection to urban forestry is this is the program that is only for urban forestry projects and only for nonprofits or community benefit organizations. So if this is something that appeals to anyone watching or on the call right now, certainly stay in touch with Amelia over the coming weeks to learn more about the RFP that I expect will be rolling out in 2022. I think we're just going to touch on some other programs real quick that are existing. This is kind of business as usual. The EMP program, again, it's one primary focal points in urban forestry. Folks can reasonably expect that this will be funded at about this level every year in perpetuity since it's moved to the Natural Resources Agency. This has typically been the allocation. This is the baseline. Last year it was actually funded at almost twice this at $13 million. But this is a good program for urban forestry and for land conservation. And again, I think you can probably expect an RFP early in 2022. Perhaps April. Here's one that I wanted to highlight. We've tried to keep this on the radar for groups for a couple years now. The Cal EPA Environmental Justice Small Grounds program was modified a couple years ago to add another project category. You see I've captured here, addressing climate change impacts through community-led solutions. I know a couple of urban forestry groups in partnership with environmental justice communities or on their own have applied for these funds and received them. What I wanted to highlight here is that typically this grant program has received anywhere from $500,000 in 1 year to I think $1.5 million a couple years ago. This 3-year budget, $25 million, 10 times more than the program has received in the 3 years prior. There's still some uncertainty as to whether or not this is going to translate into larger awards, whether or not this is going to continue in or past 2023, but this is the proposed allocation over a 3-year period. I believe it's $5 million this year and then 10 million next year and 10 million the year after. So a lot of tremendous opportunity existing in this program, which has typically funded $50,000 grants or grants up to $15,000 in the past. Of course, this is the one that everyone's most familiar with, CAL FIRE's Urban and Community Forestry Program. And we are really pleased to see the $30 million that went into this program for calendar year 2021. That's a record for the program. In conversations that I've had with CAL FIRE and also Resources Agency, there is a real interest, at least from CAL FIRE, to try to ensure that $50 million goes into this program in the next fiscal year and $50 million in the year after. And you may recall from the previous slide that this program is going to share a pot of $100 million each of those next 2 years with the urban greening program. So at least from CAL FIRE's perspective, they want to see half those funds go to the program each of those years, which means the urban greening program will get the other half. That's one of the real wins of this legislative session and of this budget, is that $100 million pot for 22 and another $100 million for 23, it can only go to one of two programs. So if your organization plays in the sandbox of urban forestry and urban greening, you're seeing record funding and a commitment to funding through fiscal year 2023. Again, this estimate is based on the $50 million that is guaranteed for this year that was in the budget, plus half of the funds for the next 2 years thereafter. This program, I like to keep this one highlighted because this is another one where a baseline of $440 million over a 4-year period is expected to be the case going forward. SB 1 from, I believe, 2018 augmented the program significantly. Urban forestry can be a component of the active transportation program. Actually participated in reviewing active transportation grants last year and did not see a lot of urban greening projects listed in there. This would be a great thing to see more opportunities become available to urban forestry nonprofits and urban green infrastructure to support active transportation. Nonprofits are directly eligible for projects that connect back to parks, trails, and safe routes to schools. So I always like to keep this on the map. It is a harder application, and it typically does involve partnerships, but one that's worth checking out. because the funding, that there's always funding for this program. I wanted to raise the AHSC program real quick because while it received a lot of funding in the fiscal year 21 budget, the Strategic Growth Council made a decision to take a large portion of those funds and actually apply them to pending projects that were coming out of the application cycle for fiscal year 2020. What this means is that the program still gets a 20% annual allocation from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, but that's going to be the allocation that supports the program in fiscal year 2022. So you shouldn't expect to see a call for proposals from AHSC probably till fall of 22. But when you do see that call, more likely than not, it's going to be for about $500 million, perhaps even more. And urban greening is a threshold requirement. California Relief actually provides technical assistance to applicants through a contract with the enterprise and Strategic Growth Council to help guide proposals to maximize the urban greening opportunity within those projects. So I like to keep this one on the radar because I know a couple of urban forestry groups have partnered with affordable housing entities and developers to integrate those priorities into those projects. Also, one of the things that we're really excited about is new prospects in state parks, both existing and new programs. The statewide park program established under AB 31 a long time ago, a decade ago, has been dry for a couple of years. It had its last allocation of Prop 68, I believe, in 2019. So now there's new money going into this program, and you can see that nonprofits are directly eligible for projects such as community gardens and orchards, and of course, urban forestry connected back to local parks projects. So happy to see this back in the mix. And then this other project that I put down here that's new in the budget, $154 million over 2 rounds for an Urban River and Waterways Park Grant Program. We really don't have a lot of information on this. This was something that was added in the budget, but it's something to keep an eye out for. And this will also be administered by Cal State Parks or the Departments of Park and Recreation. Okay, these next 3 slides admittedly are exceedingly text heavy for me. Those of you who have joined PowerPoints with me know that I'm not big on text, but I wanted to point these out because this is the best information that is available right now on these new programs that are going to become available, and I do think are going to be directly pertinent to the work that you're doing. The bill called Senate Bill 155 was passed late in the session a couple months ago, and it contained a lot of new language to support new programs covering drought, natural resources, wildfire, and extreme heat. I wanted to focus here on extreme heat and natural resources, and I wanted to start with this program. This is an offshoot of a bill that actually stalled in the legislature, AB 585, but sought to create a new program. And you'll see here for projects that mitigate impacts of extreme heat or the urban heat island effect through a variety of means, including natural shade. We do expect this program to roll out next year. There's funds available for it in 22 and 23, and it will be administered, I believe, by the Office of Planning and Research. So I wanted to put this on everyone's radar because there should be opportunity there to look at grants that could either in partnership with other groups that are maybe doing low energy or reflective surfaces, get something in there for natural shade and urban forestry as well. Another piece of language that I really want to spend a couple minutes on that came out of this budget is a $300 million allocation for extreme heat. This language is very intentionally open-ended, very inclusive. The intent is to allow these funds to help inform and implement the extreme heat framework that the state is working on right now. California Relief has been part of those discussions in terms of what the extreme heat framework will look like. It's actually updating a plan from 2013. And these are going to be funds that hopefully will help implement that program. We do know that there's an intent to create new programs from these funds, 1 or more. That doesn't mean that existing programs won't be eligible for them, but you can see here in some of the pieces that were highlighted, the direct connectivity to urban forestry. And I especially like the idea of using nature-based solutions to support outdoor school, reducing outdoor school temperatures. There's been a lot of discussion in the urban forestry community, especially over the last couple of years, about doing more to shade schools, to create outdoor education opportunities and reduce the temperatures, especially at K through 12. I very much suspect an opportunity will come out of these funds to do just that. There has been legislation put forward in the past that has not made it to the finish line. This may be an opportunity to change that course, and certainly encourage everyone to keep an eye on this, the extreme heat framework, when it comes out, and then the budget proposal that will follow in January that will have these to help implement the framework. Finally, and I realize this is very text intensive, you'll be able to go back to the webinar. Perhaps Cheryl just share the PowerPoint with you so that you don't need to go through all the narrative. This is a huge chunk of funds to support the governor's executive order from last year of hitting 30 by 30 or 30% of conserving lands to water by 2030. I believe it's $768 million total. It's scheduled to go through the Natural Resources Agency, but really that's where it's going to go before the Natural Resources Agency then disperses it to other programs and priorities. So you can see in some of the language at the top that there's a minimum commitment of $120 million to go to local conservancies. Again, strong possibility of new programs coming out of these funds, existing programs as well. I wanted to note down here the number 10, projects that are adjacent and accessible to urban populations. Obviously that fits the bill for the work that everyone is doing in urban forestry and green infrastructure. And I do expect this is going to be a tremendous opportunity going forward. So we won't spend time going through every bit of language on here. It's actually fairly dry, but I wanted to highlight some of the things that are going to be directly pertinent to the groups that are working in this field, and reinforce that this, coupled with some of the other funds, really presents a lot of opportunity. So I know the question has been asked of me over the last several months. How did we get here? Well, as I said, there was a large budget surplus. So that created a tremendous opportunity. But also, as you can imagine, there were a lot of mouths at that table as everyone was seeking their piece of the pie. I think the thing that helped us most is the viability of the projects and the work that you all do. You do create those local connections, and it does resonate with members in urban areas when they can see their tree-lined streets and local parks, and see the transformation in the communities. It's very tangible, and that's one thing that really helps. I think the other thing was consistent messaging. There were a lot of letters from a lot of different organizations supporting a lot of different priorities over the course of the last several months. I saw 7 or 8, I saw 8 letters that either directly or indirectly related to CAL FIRE's urban forestry program and the CNR urban greening program. Out of those 8 letters, only one was off point, was off message. Every other letter drove home the idea of a $400 million ask for these 2 programs. As you know, we ended up getting $280 million, or 70% of the ask, which in and of itself is pretty phenomenal when you think about some of the asks in the past have been more in line with $30 million. I think at times we've asked for $40 million. Never received more than $20 million, but those asks have also been fairly modest. Here we went out really aspirational and got 70% of the ask. So I think a lot of it had to do with working with partners to keep the message on point, developing champions in the legislature. You can see there was a letter here from Assemblymember Cristina Garcia, who championed this ask on the Assembly side, got 10% of the Assembly to sign on to her letter. But the big thing here, and you'll see that's why I've included here, is the tremendous amount of partners that were brought to the table this year. And I could spend easily a half hour just identifying all the individual achievements that groups contributed to the overall goal of driving this across the finish line. From calling local members to signing on to the letters to emails highlighting their projects. Over 300 groups across 7 different letters supported the urban forestry and urban greening ask of $400 million. And that made a huge difference. And the only one that I'm really going to call out by name was the one that was with California Relief, literally every step of the way from the minute we made the mask all the way to the last weeks of August, and that was tree people. And Manny Gonez and his team were right there with myself and my former colleague Mariella and Jamie Go and Innovative Policies to really bring this home, and give tree people a lot of credit for using their resources, their contacts in Los Angeles to help make this happen. But like I said, this was a massive team effort, and I just need to acknowledge and thank everyone who contributed to this amazing effort. So wrapping up here, lots of money, tremendous opportunity. I'm so excited for this community to be able to take advantage of these dollars that are going to be available over the next 3 years. It really would take something like a pretty deep economic crisis for the legislature and the administration to pull back those dollars in 22 and 23. The administration in particular has very much touted this huge commitment that they're making to climate change and community resilience. So I do expect these dollars to be in place. And one of the things that I think is great about the dedicated funding for 3 years in these priority programs is I personally have a very difficult time envisioning fiscal year 24 coming along and suddenly the legislature administration saying, well, we hope you enjoyed the last 3 years because now we're going to zero. I just don't see that happening. I hope this is going to be something that over the 3 years, as your programs grow and your opportunity to really affect change in the communities in which you're working is informed by these dollars that are coming down from the state, the legislature will recognize that these levels of investments are transformative. They are making an impact on the ground. And hopefully that will be taken into consideration when fiscal year 2024 rolls around. I really wanted to, again, highlight an $800 million commitment to extreme heat solutions. We've talked about most of them. The reason I like to highlight this is that, remember, in California, wildfire has been an issue, a growing issue over a decade plus. And I have colleagues that have in the NGO community have been talking about the need to invest in wildfire for 15, 17 years. And it was only 3 years ago that the legislature and the administration finally said, all right, we're going to put in a baseline budget of $200 million a year for wildfire. For extreme heat, yes, in our community, we've been discussing about it, but it's only become really prevalent, I'd say, in the last 3 or 4 years, as each year we have record-breaking temperatures that surpass the previous year. So while it's always great to be able to act immediately, the fact that the legislature put in $800 million after hearing the drumbeat from us for the last 3 or 4 years in comparison to wildfire is really something to be lifted up and recognized. $1 billion more. I have full expectations that as new programs come online, or existing programs, whether it's with the conservancies or Natural Resources Agency, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for the groups participating today or watching in the future. And then, looking out for the multiple new programs. We've talked about some of them, and there are going to be others that come on where we just don't have the information that are captured in some of those large allocations where there's no new detail because, the budget hasn't been put out for fiscal year 22 and 23. But a lot of opportunity. And with that, here are my top 5 thoughts going forward. As we've already heard from CAL FIRE and the Natural Resources Agency, is with this long-term funding that's going to be available, start planning for your projects now. Start planning for funding that's going to go out 3 years, where if your project's going to have phases, what's that's going to look like? Think big, think ambitious, and talk with those agencies that are going to be the leads on this. I know most everyone has a really good relationship with CAL FIRE. Everyone's aware there's a new state urban forester, Walter Passmore. He's a great guy. But you also have your regional urban foresters as well. New program guidelines are going to be released for a lot of what we discussed, and there's going to be a public process. Inform that process. The program that we discussed, it's going to be an offshoot from AB 585 regarding cooling, but with nature-based solutions as well, such as shade. Engage in that process. Ensure that nonprofits are eligible and that your priorities are captured in those programs. The requests for proposals are going to be rolling out, I would say, anytime within the next weeks to maybe later in 2022. Watch for those, stay in contact with California Relief. The organizations are really good at being able to capture that information and inform the network when opportunities do arise. But just follow that closely and be ready to act on them. One thing that everyone that's known me for the last 20 plus years is aware of is that I'm very keen on making sure that the urban forestry voice is heard at the state capitol. While we do have some ducks in a row to ensure opportunities in urban forestry, you still want to make sure that things are happening the way that they're supposed to based on the budgets that we've discussed today. So continue to engage, talk with your legislators, let them know what you're working on. Those are the champions that are going to ensure that these dollars go where it's supposed to go in the years to come. And then finally, it's something everyone knows is contact California Relief for help and technical assistance. A great resource. Sarah and Amelia are amazing, and they know a lot about the existing grant program at California Relief, and I'm sure we'll come up to speed on some of these new opportunities as well. And I will happily be a resource to them whenever they need. So stay in touch with them, and I believe that takes us to last slide, which really has almost nothing to do with what we've been talking about for the last half hour. But this is my last day, actually my last 90 minutes at California Relief. As you can see from this slide, I've had the opportunity to hang out with some of you over the years, and it has been a fantastic 27 years getting to support the work that you've done. And I thank you all for your partnership, your trust, your commitment to the amazing work you do. I've said it time and time again. What fuels my desire to succeed in the state capitol is the work that you're doing on the ground. And just couldn't be more pleased for the opportunity to work with you all over the last almost 3 decades, and wish everyone well. So with that, I will field any questions, though I can't possibly imagine there would be any.
There are some in the chat, Chuck, believe it or not.
Thank you, Chuck.
Oh, wow, man, I thought I'd get away with that. Okay, sure, fire away.
I can read some to you, Chuck. Thanks for going through all that information. Well, first of all, Catherine says congratulations on the wonderful achievements. And also asks, how are the cap and trade auctions going lately?
Yeah, the cap and trade auctions have been pretty strong. The thing that's unusual about this budget session, and that I should have included in that chart, is that almost nothing that we discussed is funded through cap and trade. This was the general fund was what, there was such a huge surplus from the general fund that there was a decision made to really use that for urban forestry, urban green. Like I said, practically everything we mentioned. As you know, the general fund is going to provide more flexibility in the guidelines and the projects. So for those of you who have discussed maybe once or twice over the last couple of decades the need to have funding available for maintenance, talk to CAL FIRE, talk to CNRA, see if those opportunities can become available given the large resources that are available. Cap and trade is doing well. The auctions exceeded expectations the last couple of quarters, but the legislature decided to focus primarily on low emission vehicles, low carbon freight, the AB 617 clean air program, and there's some funding in there for healthy soils, but that's where the cap and trade funds went last year. The other thing that's important to note is that, remember, it was 35% of the funds were being used for a variety of different purposes. I'm sorry, I think it's actually 65%, and that's grown because now clean water is captured in there as well. So there's still just a smaller portion that's available for discretionary spending each year. But yeah, the auctions have been going well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Also, this is a really great question. Sometimes DACs do not have the bandwidth and resources to go after these grants. How can orgs like us help and find the resources to provide this help?
Sure. Yeah. So I have two-part answer to that question. One is one of the reasons that California Relief has what we typically called over the last few years the Social Equity Grant Program, this year called the Tree Covery Grant Program, is to provide capacity, is to help build capacity with organizations. Yeah, Amelia has done an amazing job of continuing to streamline the forms and templates that folks need to use to report out on these grants. I've continued to try to streamline the application in partnership with groups in the environmental justice sector to ensure that this is as least complicated as possible in terms of being able to achieve a grant. We know from past experience that groups that have been able to work with us directly to get a small grant go on to be able to support bigger grants through state agencies such as CAL FIRE, CNRA, and the technical assistance team at California Relief is really strong. Amelia is a certified arborist. Colleen Ravden, who co-wrote the original urban tree carbon calculator, is available on all the grants in a consulting capacity. So I think California Relief does a really good job of trying to streamline the grant making process and opportunities for small groups to provide or to secure grants, and then that creates opportunities to build capacity during that time window. The other part to that question that I can answer is that the program that I mentioned at the very beginning, the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program that's going to run through the Strategic Growth Council, that was a product of a bill called Senate Bill 1072 by Senator Leyva a couple years back, but the program never received funding until now. And that is a focal point of the program, is to try to build capacity so that small groups in underserved areas can achieve more with the dollars that are available at the state level.
Great, thank you. Anne asked a question along those lines about how the commitments to GHG tracking and tree survival are limiting for nonprofits and municipalities, and she notes that it's of course important, but what provisions are likely to be included in the various opportunities? And I can answer that. Like, part of the California Relief grants, just to piggyback on what you're saying, is that we do support with the GHG tracking to help make those more accessible. But do you have any other things to add to that?
I would say build into your grant. I mean, that's what California Relief does, is that, Amelia, Sarah, and I, we don't have the expertise to try to do GHG tracking. I've gone out there with Commander Compass, and, I think I'm measuring a tree and it comes back that I'm measuring, a water tower 10 miles away. So, I make no bones about the fact that this is not my area of expertise. So, build it into your grant agreement, or build it into your proposal that you want to have a contractor for the GHG reductions and for the mapping.
But let me say, but it's not just, yeah, you can do that. But the question is, it's almost like overwhelming to say, am I going to be around in 10 or 30 years? Is a city going to have resources to do that? It's a scariness. And in terms of making those commitments, it also limits who you can plant the trees with. It has to be someone who's going to be around. And I get what the whole thing about healthy trees in the long term, but I think that especially if, anyway, that's where I've come from in terms of saying, you know what, I don't have any way to, whether you have a contract or not, but getting a partnership with someone who's going to take that on, that they're going to be there for, I don't even know what the number of years you have to track it, but it's a little bit, maybe a deeper question than I wrote out.
Okay. I mean, one thing I would say is certainly talk to other network members that have had grants in this field, and I think they could probably share their stories with you. I know there's a couple on this call. The grant commitments through the state programs are typically, maintaining the trees during the period and then 3 years thereafter.
I get that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And especially with local governments, that can be a real challenge. And I don't at all disagree with you. I do know that the grantees that we've worked with have come up with myriad creative solutions to work with that, whether it's landowners or other nonprofits or fee for service, at least through those 3-year period. And then as far as the tree tracking goes, is my understanding is that the commitment to tree tracking lasts through the granting period, typically, at least with urban greening and urban forestry grants.
No more than that. You don't have to do the GHGs for 10 or 20 or 40 years later. And that's the philosophy of the cap and trade, is that
Right.
you know it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, the way the GHG tracking works, and Catherine, I know you've received these grants, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the tool continues to be modified so that the GHGs that are being tracked during that granting period with each tree that you put in is projecting out for what that will look like in 40 years. And so you have an obligation to do that during the granting period. And then, of course, as we both noted, there is an obligation to maintain the trees, usually for at least 3 years thereafter.
Okay. Thank you. I think while we're still close to the tree coverage discussion of our own grants, Kathy, I want to raise the questions you sent me an email. One was just about, if someone applied for a grant for our first round and didn't receive one, is it worth applying again? Will it be more or less competitive in the second cycle, do you think?
I think the second cycle is going to be competitive with all the state dollars that are coming online now. It is possible that there'll be more groups looking for the bigger dollars depending on how CAL FIRE rolls out its program, of course, EMP in there, urban greening, et cetera. I do know that the round that California just finished completing, where I believe the organization awarded 11 or 13 grant agreements, was the most competitive that I'd seen in quite a while. I think it was 250% oversubscribed. So I think it will be competitive, but those that didn't receive an award in this round that applied for it, I think I talked with pretty much everyone either via email or over the phone and tried to identify what the review committee had spotted as challenges with the application and how those could be modified to be more competitive in the next round. So if you didn't have an email or conversation with me, make sure to have one with Amelia. She was on the review committee and she'd be able to guide you to how that project could possibly be more competitive. But certainly I encourage folks to apply in round 2 if they didn't receive an award in round 1. Of course, that's also easier for me to say because I'm only here another 75 minutes.
Yes. I think this is a good question about trees on private, residential, commercial land, and there being a lot of potential there. What are the various opportunities for private trees?
I'm actually tempted to let Amelia field this because I think she's going to be handling the grants program or multiple facets of it henceforth. I believe she's always been more open to that idea than I have, but I do recognize that as more money becomes available and less public opportunities, especially with some of the challenges of local governments, though, as you said, Anne, can sometimes be reticent to take on long-term tree care. We do have to look at private land. And so California Relief has actually opened up the state grants to private land in urban areas, homes planting on the front or the side, public property or private property held for public benefit, land trust lands, but also churches and hospitals. And then we're working with a partner in rural Fresno County right now to actually do tree planting on more isolated lands as well, private lands in more remote territories. So I do think this is going to be something that's going to continue to expand as an opportunity. It's just a matter of being able to again, track those trees, make sure you have access to maintenance. I mean, one of the great things about private landowner tree planting is that the private landowner is usually willing to commit to maintaining the trees. But Catherine has an observation here as well.
Not as easy as it seems or sounds, or at least for us at Canopy, we've done quite a bit of, private property, residential plantings funded by CAL FIRE grants because they did allow that in the last few rounds. A lot of trees died, and then we go ahead and replant them, and it really depends on the community, and it's hard. People are tenants, they're not homeowners. They change, they want the tree, but they don't know how to take care of them. We think we provide a lot of resources, but it ends out that we probably don't provide enough resources. So it's extremely time consuming for us, staff intensive, because it's our staff who goes out and work on all of those trees. So I think maybe it depends on the community, but it's not a panacea.
Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine. And then David, I see you have a question too.
Oh, okay.
Not a question, a response to what Catherine just said. City Trees, just up the road from where Catherine is, was experiencing the same problems. And the way that we've decided to approach this is we are funding the Department of Public Works to water the trees on the weekends, so their employees get overtime. And that seems to be working. So
I didn't know you were doing this, David. I mean, that's quite amazing. So here's this little, I mean, no disrespect, this small nonprofit that has very limited staff resources that is funding the city's public works department for this. I think it's super creative. I think it's quite amazing.
well,
Congratulations.
what the partnership with the Department of Public Works is that we fund the labor, the overtime labor on the weekends. They fund the water and the use of the watering truck, and it's working.
Nice.
Wow.
That's
Congratulations.
super creative. Bravo.
Thank you.
Catherine kind of answered one of my questions, which was just you were speaking to Chuck, the tree recovery and our grants about planting in private land. And then Catherine was saying that CAL FIRE has allowed it the last few cycles. Do you have a sense of the other grant programs you talked about, if those will allow planting on private property?
I think urban greening does. Again, wanted to be planning for public benefit, so making the trees visible. Some of the other programs I am, certainly worth asking. And if they don't, work with partners to get them into the guidelines and revise the guidelines. The guidelines usually aren't set by statute. They're set by the agency. Sometimes they are set by statute, but every time there's a call for proposals, there's usually a workshop for to discuss the existing guidelines. And then of course, when new guidelines are developed, there's a public opportunity for input as well. So that could be one approach.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's been a few comments about needing money, which I know is an ongoing thing for maintenance and protecting the trees afterwards. And I think you touched on it, that you thought, since this isn't cap and trade money and there is so much more of it, that they might be open to that in some of these different programs.
I would say, especially with CAL FIRE, and if John were on the call, he would admit to this, is that the only place where John and I have consistent disagreement over the last couple decades is maintenance. And to be truthful, we actually agree on the concept that maintenance is a local responsibility. I think where we disagree is that if the locals aren't doing it, what do you do then? And I support the idea of being able to use state funds to do that when the local government is not following through on that commitment. These are going to be general fund dollars, and I would say, make your voices heard with CAL FIRE to try to incorporate in at least some limited maintenance. I know we started a conversation with CAL FIRE a couple of years ago, picking up on a phrase that I think may have been coined by Friends of the Urban Forest called triage, which was at least being able to provide some dollars for mature trees to maintain them and prevent them from dying because of the tremendous benefit that they provide to the community. That could be a starting point, is at least trying to provide some kind of pilot program to allow for that before just going full bore and can we have a program that maintains existing trees? So just one thought.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? Folks can put in the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself. We have time for about one or two more. No. Okay, well, in that case, I just want to say thank you so much, Chuck. You've been an incredible champion of urban forests and of the Relief Network. And I just want to add personally that as my colleague, you've been a champion of me, and for that I'm really grateful. And I think I speak for everyone that we will miss you and thank you, and don't be a stranger. So
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Yeah, glad I can leave everyone with money in the bank.
Yeah, what a good way to go out.
Absolutely.
So thank you all for joining us.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.